Hello, this is Modern Psychology Center Archetype. My name is Timur Brodsky, and today I'm going to tell you about my textbook Modern Socionics. Here you can see the first edition, February 2018. This is my cat, is helping me to pack the books for the readers. And here she checked that everything is okay. And this is the first extract from my textbook, and I'm going to translate it into English because so far my book exists only in Russian language, but I'm planning to work on the translation in English in order that Western audience could read it and know about the new discoveries in socionics. So let's start. Greetings, my name is Timur Brodsky. I'm a psychologist from Kaliningrad, Russia. By nature, I have the ability to delve into complex issues, adapt them to practice, and talk about it in simple language. It is so happened that many years ago, back in 2006, I came across socionics, and from that moment socionics began to grow within my outlook, and later it became my profession. Since 2015, socionic Catherine Popova has been working with me in socionics and psychosophy. Together we have developed modern paradigm of our teaching and adjusted the majority of unsettled features in old socionics and psychosophy. First of all, the problem of delimitation between socionics and psychosophy was resolved, as well as the closure of many white spots and contradictions in old socionic theories. Also, we made a number of discoveries and significant corrections during our practice, both in socionics and in psychosophy. This book is a summary of my and our joint work with Catherine in socionics during more than 10 years. The book also describes the numerous observations from everyday life that we collected during several years of our parallel and joint consulting and teaching practice in socionics. At present, our joint consulting and typing experience covers more than 4,500 people. When I first became acquainted with socionics, I was extremely impressed with its consistency and, most importantly, the possible universality of its application. It seemed that it was the theory that is able to explain the diversity of people's individualities, as well as to predict the features of their interaction. Later it became clear that not everything is so simple. The old socionics had promised and simplified too much, and its postulates contained too many ambiguities and contradictions. There was no common methodology in typing and many other problems. But nevertheless, socionics does provide partial answers to many significant questions. For example, what principles of sympathy and antipathy arise between people? Why the choice of a partner turns out to be successful or not? What interaction features can be predicted using socionics? What principles determine political views? Why does someone become a leader in specific fields like science, art, or business, and many other? After several years of studying socionics and identifying psychological types of several thousand people, we began getting larger scale conclusions. For example, why there are incompatible ideologies in society, for example, liberals and conservatives, pacifists and militarists, etc. Why are development cycles and transformations of states repeat over and over again? Why do wars and revolutions occur, and what psychotypes provoke their occurrence? Why the image of humanity as a species and the type of its occupation is such as it is? Socionics allows you to take a fresh look at the issues that are studied in traditional disciplines. For example, socionics can bring a lot of usefulness to sociology and any related disciplines that study social processes at different levels. Starting from the original 16 psychological types, one can see the principles and laws that stood for centuries behind events and processes in various countries, ranging from the mechanisms of revolutions and ending with disputes between philosophers of different times. Our research in the field of quadra values, and especially the adjustment of old versions of socionic types for many well-known personalities, allowed us to relook at many historical processes, events, and social phenomena. The range of conclusions that arose from our socionic research goes far beyond the topic of this book. In general, socionics is really cool, despite it is still a young psychological direction, but it has a huge potential. If we manage to convey to you our views and conclusions, then you will be convinced of this too. In this book you will find our most relevant understanding of socionics. Many socionic features and concepts continue being supplemented and refined. Our paradigm is not like something frozen and unchanged. Our everyday practice of consulting and teaching gives us a continuous flow of information for analysis and for discoveries. All statements in this book are based on real experience, which had been proved by the repeatability of results, taking into account feedback from our graduates and a rather lengthy experience of typing several thousand people in various ways, personally and remotely. Given is the correction of old socionic theoretical and practical mistakes that have been accumulated over the 4 decades of socionics existence. For more than a decade of my practice in socionics, I have studied each of the most noticeable and significant approaches that had been proposed since the days of first socionics publications were made by its creator, Lithuanian researcher Aušra Augustinavičiūtė. During practical verification, the significant part of old socionics concepts had to be corrected or abandoned, since real practice largely refutes the old hypotheses and ideas that were proposed at socionics' early years, 80s and 90s. I believe that any socionic approach has the right to life if it is justified from practical point of view and demonstrates good reliability in everyday practice. The objectives of this book are to offer modern solutions for long-standing socionic problems that have not been satisfactorily resolved so far, to give as far as clear definition of socionic dichotomies, to give consistent description of 8 socionic aspects, functions, of their internal logic, to reveal the meaning and mechanics of their functioning, to correct obsolete perceptions about aspects, to define the boundaries of socionic types, to clarify the circle of psychological features that socionics takes under its jurisdiction. Without this, it is impossible to make any proper description of socionic type. Without this, perception of socionic types remains at the level of dubious subjective impressions, a chaotic mixture of behavior, habits, and other occasional traits of character. As a result, other related tasks are also solved, clarifying the meaning and borders of quadra values, clarifying the role of intertype relationships, clarifying socionic claims to describing human mental properties, clarifying types of famous people, clarifying versions of common people types, possible hypotheses about socionic types prevailing in society, and much more. In this book, the traditional socionic names of types, Hugo, Robespierre, Zhukov, Stiglitz, etc., are used purely in the socionic meaning and have no relation to historical and artistic characters whose names had been taken as types names. This is especially important to emphasize in the context of the fact that many persons whose names are used as socionic types names actually belonged to other types, which became clear decades after the appearance of the first works on socionics. We are still working on the verification of the correctness of names of 16 types, taking into account modern data and methodology. Where did socionics come from? Actually, socionics began in 1921, but there were no such name of this typology at that time. It was a typology created by Carl Jung. He is a world-famous Swiss psychologist and psychiatrist who made a number of discoveries in psychology. All his life, Jung was engaged in a comprehensive study of human psyche and left a huge legacy. Most of all, Carl Jung is known in popular culture and psychology as the founder of the theory of archetypes. It's about the fundamental principles of human culture, symbols and images that are encoded in the collective unconscious. Jung is one of the first psychologists who described such well-known psychological attitudes as introversion and extroversion, which was later developed in psychology. Among Jung's heritage, there is a work that is extremely important for socionics, the book Psychological Types, published in 1921. Thanks to the publication of this work, Jung became the grandfather of socionics. Jung's typology also greatly inspired the Russian researcher Alexander Afanasyev to create another typology which is called psychosophy. The concepts and positions that Jung outlined in Psychological Types were not the most important priority for him to study. Having written this work, he left it aside and continued to deal with various issues of culture, deep psychology of mankind, archetypes, and so on. Nevertheless, in Psychological Types, he gave the basic sketches of what became the basis of socionics a couple of decades later. Thanks to Jung's observations, talent, and genius, he studied human nature in an extremely deep way. He was helped by his natural inclination to systematize psychological features and to see hidden parallels between various phenomena. So, observing people, patients, and clients, he noticed that very often the problems with which they deal, their way of perception of the world, their outlook on life have similar features. What is the essence of Psychological Types concept? Jung argued that every person has an innate psychological type. It is only one and it does not change to another one during lifetime. One of the basic psychological parameters noted and described by Jung were extroversion and introversion. It was one of 4 dichotomies which determine psychological type. The next 2 dichotomies show prevailing psychological functions. Thinking, in modern socionics, it is logic; feeling, in socionics, ethics; sensation, and intuition. Jung also wrote that these mental functions are divided in 2 classes, rational and irrational. He attributed thinking and feeling to the rational class of functions and sensation and intuition to the irrational class. Thus, in his work, Jung described 8 psychological types, relying only on their basic function. However, he mentioned the auxiliary additional function, which in socionics was called creative. In the socionic model A, the basic function is in the first place, and the creative function is in the second place. But Jung was not interested in this function, and in the future he did not develop this theory and outlined 8 basic psychological types only. So, according to the initial theory, the type with the basic extroverted logic is only one, regardless of its creative function. In the socionic theory, there are already 2 different types with the basic extroverted logic. Black logic. Logical intuitive extrovert Jack London and logical sensory extrovert Stiglitz. Their different creative function makes them 2 different types, which have common basic function. The book about psychological types was published in Europe, but it was not given significant attention in the psychological environment. However, in the 30s, during the life of Jung, there appeared people in the USA, Catherine Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Myers, who became interested in Jung's works and began developing the concept he outlined. So, by the beginning of the Second World War, the first version of the questionnaire test for determining the Jung types appeared, and it contained not 8 types, but 16. In such way, MBTI personality indicator appeared. It was an important step in the development of Jung's ideas. So it was the first extract from my book. Thank you for your attention and see you later.